This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
So you can walk on the water in the storms of life. How do you do it? You have to dote it. Dote. D-O-T-E. You have to dote it. Now there are two, if you look this word up in the dictionary, there are two meanings for it. The first one means to exhibit a mental decline, like that of old age. The other meaning is to lavish attention. I think we'll choose the second meaning and go with that. How do you dote? How do you dote on the storms of life? Well, each letter obviously means something, and so let's go through these. The first one is D. You define your potential by the one who created you. Here's one of the critical issues that's happened in life for so many people. They define their worth, they define their value, they define their potential by what other people think about them, not by what God thinks about them. Doesn't it make more sense that you should define your potential by the one who created you? What does God think about you? What does God think about your potential? What does God think about your ability? What does God think about you? As opposed to what everybody else thinks about you. This is probably one of the greatest examples, if you will, of possibility thinking that ever was. You know that I'm a major proponent of possibility thinking. And we've taught, it's a biblical principle. We tend to think in probabilities, oh, this is probably what's going to happen, but God thinks in possibilities. God looks at things and says, all things are possible. For me, nothing is impossible. And He looks at those issues in your life and He says, this is what's possible. We think in probabilities. This has nothing to do, by the way, with positive thinking. Positive thinking is just that you want something so bad that you put yourself in a position, you think positively about it, and you hope things happen for the best. And you know, it's a Norman Vincent Peale thing. And this has nothing to do with positive thinking. If you're a positive thinking proponent, fine. This has nothing to do with that. This is a biblical principle. Probability thinking versus possibility thinking. Thinking of what God wants to accomplish. And so it is probability thinking would have kept Peter in the boat. Peter, if you step out of the boat, you're probably going to drown. Possibility thinking looks beyond the storm. Possibility thinking sees beyond the storm. You are not, listen to what I'm saying here, you are not what everyone else says you are. You are what God says you are. You are not what everybody else says about you. You are what God says about you. And trust me, everybody else is saying some pretty nasty things about you. Some of them are true. But what does God say about you? How does God look at you? What does God think about you? And that's where Peter was coming from, really. He was defining his potential by the one who created him. I don't think he really understood exactly, I don't think he thought it out that way, but that's really what he did. You are not what everybody else says about you. You are what God says about you. And listen to this. You have to take that one step further. Your circumstances, your storms, are not what everybody else says. They are what God says they are. The circumstances in your life, the storms that you're going through, the problems that you're having to face on a day-by-day basis, they're not what everybody else says they are. They are what God says they are. What does God say they are? What does God say about those circumstances that you're having to face in your life? Those problems that you're having to deal with on a day-by-day basis. What does God say about those issues in your life? Not what everybody else says, not what all the books say, not what all the counsel is that you're getting from everybody else, but what does God say about it? Define your potential by the one who created you. Verse 29, obey immediately. Obey immediately. Now, it's interesting. Look at the command. And the verse is on the screen there. Look at the command. The command was not to walk on the water, was it? The command was to come to Jesus. That was the command. We look at it, whoa, God told him to walk on the water. No, He didn't. He told him to come to me. Much bigger issue. Much bigger issue. You see, in this story, we see two great commands that God gives us in the storms of life. The first one is don't be afraid. The second one is come. Come to me. Come to me in the storm. And you know what that says? When Jesus says to us, come to me in the storm, it says he's there. He's right there in the middle of the storm. It doesn't mean get out of the storm and come to me. And it doesn't mean, wait, I got it, I'll handle it, let the storm, I'll take care of the storm, and then everything will be okay. No, he says, come to me in the middle of the storm. Come to me. And notice that Peter immediately went to Jesus. He did not go wandering around in the storm like Dan Hurst would have done. You see, if I'd have gotten out of the boat and I'm walking on the water, I'm going, dude, this is cool. And Jesus is over there waiting for me, and I'm walking around the boat, you know. Hey, guys, look at me. I'm on this side of the boat. Now I'm on this side of the boat, you know. How do I do it? It's a miracle. And I'd have been so excited about the miracle. We do that because we're dumb. But Peter went right to Jesus. He didn't get all caught up in the fact that he was walking on the water. He made a beeline toward Jesus. He wanted to be with Jesus. And why wouldn't he? He's in the middle of a storm. He might have been thinking, and because I would have thought this, he might have been thinking, I'm the smart one. I got out of the boat. Those guys are going to drown. But he wanted to be with Jesus. And yet, how many people in this room? In fact, let me change the question. Do you go running through the storm and just end up in more chaos? You think you've got some instruction, some direction from God. You're trying to do what God tells you to do, and God says, why don't you come to me? And so you step out of the boat, and all of a sudden, wow, this is kind of cool. I can walk on the water. And instead of going right straight to Jesus, because the command was to come to me, wasn't go walking on the water. The command was come to me. Instead of coming to Jesus, you take off and run around the boat. How many of us do that? See, we do. The third way that you dote is the letter T, and that is trust your calling. Trust your calling. In verses 30 through 31, here's an example where Peter had the calling. Jesus had given him the command, and he had empowered him to walk on the storm. He gets out and starts walking, and then he stopped trusting his calling. The calling was to come to Jesus. And instead of making a beeline towards Jesus, he starts looking around at the storm. He starts looking around at everything that was going on. And he took his eyes off of the source and put his eyes on the storm. Keep your eyes on your source, not your storm. Keep your eyes in the middle of the storm. Keep your eyes on your source, not your storm. This is something that I have to face and deal with all the time in my life, and you do too. And I find myself, running a business and trying to keep a budget together and looking at all of these things that I have to deal with on a day-by-day basis. And sometimes I look at it and I say, it's just not working. It's just falling apart. Things are not happening the way they're supposed to go. And I get so panic-ridden sometimes. And then I realize, Hurst, put your eyes back on your source and not on the storm. Trust your source, not the storm. You see, I get busy trying to fix the storm, which is dumb. How many of you ever fixed a storm? How many of you have ever stopped a storm? How many of you have ever wandered out into the middle of lightning and thunder and everything going, all right, that's it, we're going to stop this thing right now? Every one of you has done that. If not that physically, you've done it in the storms of your life. Why do we do that? Because we're dumb. Trust your calling. Keep your eyes on your source, not the storm. Let me ask you something. What's driving you in the midst of your storm? The storm that you're going through now in your life, what's driving you? What is it that motivates you to do what you're doing in the middle of your storm? Let me give you this little illustration, and I hope you'll remember this. Faith over fear equals failure. Fear over faith equals failure. Faith over fear equals favor. Fear over faith equals failure. When fear overcomes your faith, you are sure destined for failure. But when faith is above your fear, you will enjoy the favor of God. Which brings us to the last part of doting. D-O-T-E-E, experience God's presence. Let Jesus into your boat. Seems like a simple statement, doesn't it? Sounds like something you'd hear at camp, Bible camp. Let Jesus into your boat. And you're going, oh, okay, but we don't know how, do we? We don't know what to do. It's amazing how many people want God to calm the storm before they let Him into their life. God will let you into your life, but you got to calm the storm first. And what would have happened if the disciples, the 11 disciples who were still in the boat, said, you're not getting in here until you calm the storm. Make a deal with you, Jesus. You can come into the boat, but you got to calm the storm first. We would have looked at them and said, what are you guys, idiots? And yet, how many people do that today? God, you've got to calm the storm before you can come in and take control of my... If you can calm this storm, then you can take control of my life. No. No. Doesn't it make sense to have someone in your boat that isn't affected by the storm and in fact has control over the storm? Doesn't it make sense to have someone in your life that isn't affected by the storm and in fact has control over the storm? Notice that the storm, by the way, didn't stop once Jesus had taken hold of Peter. Once Peter started falling and drowning in the water and Jesus reaches in and pulls him out of the water, the storm still didn't stop. The storm still wasn't over. There are an awful lot of people going through storms, and God finally reaches down and grabs them in the middle of the storm, and He has a hold of them, and they know that He has a hold of them, and the storm continues, and many of us say, God, why is the storm still going on? Ever been there? Shake your head north to south. God's got a hold of you, and you know that you've yielded to God. You've done everything that you know you're supposed to do. You're trusting the Lord. He has a hold of you. You know that He's there. You've had fellowship with Him, and the storm continues. Why? Because, period. Because that's in the boat, remember, where the rest of the disciples were. And God was working in their lives also. He still had to work in their lives. It wasn't just Peter. He didn't have to calm the storm just for Peter. He had to calm the storm for all of those guys. Oh, and by the way, don't forget that there were other boats out on the water too. So, these 11 disciples, they didn't know peace until Christ stepped into their world in the storm. He had a hold of Peter. And by the way, I've always wondered, when He took a hold of Peter, how did they get from that point into the boat? Did He drag him? Or was Peter able to walk on the water again? I don't know. And see, I'm waiting for the videotape. But I've always wondered, how did, after he got a hold of Peter, did He say, come on, Peter, and He drags him through the water? That's okay with me. As long as God got a hold of me, drag me through the water, just get me into the boat. That's all I'm saying. I don't know how He got him to the boat. But the storm didn't stop by rescuing Peter. The storm stopped after He had to deal with the disciples in the boat, which was about to go under anyway. And so they didn't know that peace until Christ stepped into their world in the storm. Now, when you experience God's presence, you have to let Jesus into the boat, into your life. But secondly, you have to acknowledge God's authority over your life. That's the second part of it. It's not just letting Jesus into the boat of your life, but acknowledging His authority over your life. This was the first time, by the way, that the disciples acknowledged who Jesus was. Do you see that? They said, truly you are the Son of God. That was the first time that the disciples acknowledged who He was. You see, It's more than just acknowledging who Jesus is in your life. We all agree that He's God. Nobody here is probably going to, you might disagree with it, you might challenge it, you might question it, but it's not one of those things that we are going to be divisive about. We're not going to be split down the middle saying, how many of you think He's God? I do. How many of you think He's not? I do. And it's not that. We all generally believe He's God. And when we're in the storms of life, we're willing to trust Him in those storms of our life. So it's not just acknowledging who Jesus is. It's about submitting to His authority and His love and His commitment to you. You see, remember, Jesus came out in the storm to them. They didn't have to float over to Him. He came to them, and in the storms of your life, Jesus comes to you with His authority and His love and His commitment to you. And sometimes in the middle of the storm, you won't see Him until you are in the storm, and you don't even know that you've seen Him. You think you've seen a ghost like they did. And you freak out. What's going on here? Where's God? And He's standing right there. And not until He gets into the boat that you recognize Him, and then when you are willing to submit to His authority in your life and His love and His commitment to you, then you begin to understand who He is. When Jesus came to them in their storm, He was revealing His compassion and His concern for them, which is exactly what God is wanting to do for you in the midst of your storm. Let me wrap it up with this. What our community needs more than anything else in the world, what your co-workers need more than anything else in the world, what your neighbors need more than anything else in the world, what your family needs more than anything else in the world, is to know that Jesus is there and that He can meet the needs of their empty, broken, hurting, dark, desperate lives. When you start seeing Jesus in the midst of the storm, then you'll know that you can find safety and healing. When you start recognizing and believing that Jesus is there, God will begin to bless you beyond description. What is your storm? For some of us, it's the stress and the pressure of just keeping on. For some of us, it's facing some overwhelming, frightening storms. Could be physical, could be health, could be family, could be jobs, financial. It could be any number of things that are just frightening and overwhelming. For others, it may be outright persecution for our faith. Persecution by a family member, by a friend, by coworkers, by the boss. What is your storm that you're going through? I want you to know that even as the storm didn't keep Jesus away from the disciples, your storm doesn't keep Him away either. He's there in the storm, and He's ready to meet you and calm your life. Calm your fear and calm your storm. I love what Romans 8:35 through 39 says. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or danger, or sword? It's written, for your sake we're being killed all the day long. We're regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all of these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. And here's the most important two words, our Lord. He has to be Lord of your life to be able to deal with the storms of your life. Some of you need to get out of the boat and walk on the stormy water if Jesus tells you to. Some of you should stay in the boat and watch and learn because that's what you're supposed to do. But all of us, as did the disciples when Peter and Jesus got back into the boat, all of us need to take our eyes off of the conditions and the circumstances, even if it's just for a while, and discover the amazing healing joy of worship, discovering and knowing God. Let's
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.